Welcome to the presentation on trauma education in trauma education in what northeastern Africa. We often hear a lot about these days about Ukraine and Gaza and the West Bank and the war between Israel and Hamas. What we don't hear about and what we haven't really been kept attuned to is what's going on in Africa and the severe human trauma and emergencies that are going on in Northern Africa. So today we get to focus on that. And this is what Kathy Railsback has been devoting her life to recently. I just a personal note, when we just moved here about 2.5 years ago, and I had been in the area in 1979 and participated in a 3-day Trident to Life action that was sponsored by the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. And so I knew when we moved up here from California that one of the things I really wanted to connect with was the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. And it happened that while we saw the rainbow flag flying above this church, and we decided to visit this church. And on one of the first occasions that we came, Kathy Railsback was here, and it turns out she's the resident activist at the Ground Zero Center for Nonviolent Action. And so it was really fortuitous for us to make the connections both with Suquamish Church and with the Ground Zero Center. Kathy has got a really interesting background, and I know she's going to cover some of that in her presentation a little bit. But she has been a immigration attorney for quite a long time. One of the things she points to is that in 1982 she helped with refugees from Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and ever since then has been working on refugee, people seeking asylum and refugees, and sort of the trauma that's related to a lot of those people from their experiences. So this is what she has focused on in the programs that she's now conducting in Africa. So Kathy, I know you're going to fill us in a little bit more on the details, but thank you very much for doing this presentation.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you all for coming. I can go ahead. I have a presentation to give. I'll give it a minute. There we go. All right. Well, thank you very much. As Dave mentioned, I'm going to be talking about my work, in particular, the work that I've been doing over the last about 1.5 years in Kenya and Uganda. So go ahead, next, please. This is a little bit about my background that I did start in 1982 working with refugees. And for some of you have met my husband, he actually is a refugee from Cambodia. So I met him in a refugee camp. He was my interpreter, in fact. Okay, next slide. And then I continued, as Dave mentioned, to be an immigration attorney. But pretty early on, I'd say about 10 years, about in the 90s, I was on a board of a refugee organization, church-based in Seattle. And it struck me, we were doing strategic planning. It struck me like it wasn't making sense that we just kept assisting all these refugees kind of downstream, and it's like, why aren't we doing more to prevent these crises? Then why are we helping all these people after the fact, after they've suffered all these terrible traumas? And I still feel the same way. So, next slide, please. So what happened is I heard about 10 years ago, I heard about a project that was developed in Rwanda and Burundi after the genocide there. There was a terrible genocide there in the 90s. And they developed a program with the assistance of the Quakers. And it was based on the Alternatives to Violence project, which is widely used here, actually in 45 countries. It's widely used in prisons to help people kind of deal with internal violence, external violence, and trauma. So what happened was that program was introduced in Rwanda, brought over to Rwanda and Burundi, and they said, well, we like this kind of model, but we'd like to add some trauma content to it, because people were still reeling from the genocide. So I heard a presentation about this at Boise State in 2013 and I thought, well, this is a good way. I wanted to do peacemaking, and I thought this is a good way to work towards peace, is to help people work on their traumas, and if people can deal with the traumatic experiences, then hopefully you can do something with all that anger that's built up, and it won't lead to further conflict. So this is the area that I've been working in with Friends Peace Teams. Again, it's the Quaker organization, and they have teams on the ground. They have people that live in all these countries that are doing doing wonderful peace work. So the countries really are like Kenya, the main countries, Kenya, Uganda, and I've done a lot in Congo, and I hope to go back there, and really would hope to go to South Sudan, but I'll mention that a little bit later. Next, please. So I applied for this funding from my college. I went to Grinnell College in Iowa, and they have this wonderful grant of $40,000, and they give it to, they're very generous, and it's very broad. It's kind of for any kind of project for basically like social well-being or something. So, and I had tried multiple times, and then I went to an AVP workshop. I tried 4 times, in fact, and I went to an AVP workshop and was talking with some formerly incarcerated people who were talking about, one person in particular, Rodney, had talked about how many times he had tried to get out of prison, and he'd tried like 5 times. And I had just been on the cusp of trying to decide if I should apply for this again. And I thought, well, if Rodney can do it, I can do it. So I, so I have to give thanks to Rodney because he was a real inspiration. So I did. I scrambled. I applied for this thing, and then I got it, much to my surprise. So what I proposed was to do. It was the same program I'd been working on for many years. I proposed a program to work in. I had worked already in Kenya, but not in Uganda, and I had worked with South Sudanese refugees. And so I decided, well, I'll design a project, a proposal related to South Sudan, because that's the biggest refugee crisis right now in Africa. There are millions of people who are internally displaced, and there are 1 million between Uganda and Kenya. There's like 800 something thousand in Uganda and 100 something thousand in Kenya, and in these refugee camps. So I'd met many of the South Sudanese, and they were eager. I'd done a little bit of this trauma education with them, and they were eager to learn more and to try to spread it. So um, this was the proposal, to try to do 24 workshops and train facilitators who among the refugees, because I'll talk a little bit more about this program, the Healing and Rebuilding Our Communities, or HEROC methodology, but it's based on local facilitators. And I said we would translate I asked for funding to translate our manual, which is like 46 pages, into the 2 main languages of South Sudan, Dinka and Nuer languages. Okay, next. Okay, I've mentioned all of this. Yeah, there's definitely a shortage of mental health services in the refugee camps and in South Sudan. This was one of the reasons we decided to focus on South Sudan, because many people are living close to the border and will eventually return. What people don't know is very few refugees in these camps ever get resettled in countries like the US. I mean, it's under 1%. So the vast majority either stay in the camps or end up going back home, maybe to another country. But the average stay in a refugee camp is like 20 years now. So people know. Yeah, people don't have any idea really. Okay, next. So this was another reason to work with refugees, is that people have time to attend training. We have our workshops are 3 days, 3 consecutive days. The days kind of build on each other, the skills that you're learning and so forth. So many of the people, it's an enormous waste of human potential, I'll just say, that there are all these people in these camps, including many young people that are really not able to do anything. I mean, they're trying, but the opportunities are extremely limited. Many can't afford to go to school. So there are people there with time on their hands. And so I thought, okay, well, we might as well try to do something, or bring something that could assist people with projects to work on and skills to learn. That's a picture of the Kakuma refugee camp. Next. So these are the two places specifically that we've been doing the project in the Kakuma refugee camp in northwest Kenya, and I've circled Gulu. The actual name is Adjumani. And Adjumani in Uganda is very close to the border of South Sudan. It's something like, I think it's like 45 kilometers. So might be 45 minutes anyway. It's right on the other side of the border. Next. This is the methodology that we use. That's a picture from Congo. Next. So I think I mentioned all of this already, but I didn't mention the last bullet point that it's been used. This methodology was developed in Rwanda, and then it's of great interest to many people from many countries in Africa have come to be trained in this. And my training in 2013, we had people from, I don't know, 6 countries or something, mostly in Africa, but it's been widely used in Nigeria, with people who are recovering from the Boko Haram crises there, and Central African Republic, and some really large scale crises. People have been using it with support from different organizations. So I feel like it's pretty well tested. Oh, Kathy. Sure. Healing and rebuilding our communities. Yeah. So healing and rebuilding our communities, or HEROC, is how we pronounce it. Yeah, it's not like a program exactly. It's like, so I call it a methodology. Okay, next. So one of the things that captivated me about this model, for me, it was like a light bulb. And it's the idea that when an individual is traumatized, the impacts are not only on that one person, but it's certainly on their family. When you have somebody who's traumatized, it doesn't just affect that person, but the symptoms that person is going through or experiencing, which could be anger, could be depression, could be substance abuse, the ways that person is experiencing the trauma symptoms. Naturally, all of those are going to affect the people in their household. So then you've got a family that's dealing with it, and sometimes that can translate to violence in the home, or some of the same symptoms in the other family members. And then when you've got a family that's going through all this turmoil, that can affect the broader community. The way you might have kids that are unsupervised or getting in trouble and causing problems with neighbors and so forth. So we discussed this in the workshops, but what the light bulb moment for me though was when we talked about this working in the reverse, and that is, if you can help an individual, if you can help just one individual deal with their trauma and kind of process it and see what they've been through, and figure out a way forward. When that person has experienced some healing, that too will affect the family in a positive way. It just works the same in reverse, so then you get a family that's doing a little bit better and feeling more solid. And then when you get more families that are feeling this, that too can translate to a more thriving community. Those families will be making positive impacts in their institutions, in the schools, and in their communities, in their churches. So that's when I thought, oh, this makes sense as a good way to work for peace. It's accessible. They have facilitators. And so I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I've learned a great deal. I've probably been over there about like 13 times, I'd say, since I became a facilitator. So I've gone there. I'll go mostly I've gone to Congo, South Kivu, but then more recently in Kenya and Uganda. Just so I've gone and I've brought funds for workshops typically, and I've just learned because they have experienced facilitators over there. So I've been more like just in a support role and as a facilitator and helping when I can, but honestly, mostly learning. And next slide, please. Oh, next slide. Oh, there you go. This is what it kind of looks like. We typically meet in churches there. And I want to mention, because I want to mention like that this really does involve like a cast of thousands sometimes, because we have churches that we work with. The pastors are helping to identify participants. We have facilitators, we have interpreters. And so I don't want to give the impression that this is a Kathy Railsback project because it's not in any way just a Kathy Railsback project. It's like it takes like all these different people to do this work, and including the participators. But anyway, that's what it looks like. I think that's in Kakuma, in Kenya. Pretty large churches, and the pastors have been well. So we've worked with pastors from the Presbyterian Church of South Sudan and the Episcopalian Church of South Sudan in both Kenya and Uganda. And what I've noticed is, and we've worked with many different churches, and it's not a religious program. I'll say that too, because we've used it in religious contexts and in secular contexts and different religions with Muslim populations also. So I feel like it's pretty universal. It has been because of the work with the Quakers. They've been a very good uh, conduit, I guess. It's been helpful. It's been a good starting point to work because they have an organizational framework. So the Quakers have helped us to. We've met in friends' churches, and then also they have friends who are other pastors, and the pastors have been very welcoming. I think because first of all, they themselves have experienced trauma in many cases, like the rest of the community. And also because they're being visited on a daily basis by all their parishioners who are experiencing trauma, and they're officiating at funerals and they're, getting they're having these, kind of catastrophic situations of people without food or without resources or without medical care. And these poor pastors have to deal with this every day. Next. So this is some of the advantages of it. It's peer led. I I think it's kind of like an AA model, actually. I haven't been in AA, but I think it's the same kind of framework where it's a group that develops bonds. And you realize the knowledge knowledge and experience that everybody in the group has, to benefit each other and strengthen each other. So that's one of the first principles. It's a community level, a common desire for healing. So in Rwanda, I mean, the way it actually started in Rwanda was that they would have balanced groups of kind of like 10 people from the Tutsis and 10 people from the Hutus. And these sides had been killing each other. And we were kind of the same actually with these recent ones where we had Dinka and Nuer, and we also tried to be balanced. And my daughter asked like, why in the situation of Rwanda, why would someone say whose parents had been killed, by members of the other group or even people that were in the same workshop? Why would somebody want to come to see the people that had killed their family members and spend 3 days with them? But the answer is that every in my experience, many of the people want to get past. They want to get past that. The people uh, who have, I say, lost a loved one, they want to move on. They don't want to be harboring this intense anger, every time. In Rwanda and many of the places I work, the people are still in the same areas, so they're still seeing each other all the time. So definitely the people who've lost family members want to move on. in many cases. And also the perpetrators want to move on. They want to make amends often, and they feel they want to try to be members of the community, brought back into the community somehow. And many times they want to try to play a constructive role in the community, and make amends. So anyway, that's what kind of gets people to come to these things. Um, also, we try that one of our other main goals is to try to develop a safe space where people can talk about their traumatic experiences, because it does require people to be vulnerable. Uh, Fun is the strangest word I know for like trauma education workshops with with like atrocity survivors, but we try to make it fun. And that's kind of one of the beauties of the model we work with, the Quaker model, is that it's kind of a mix of like serious and heavy things, and then kind of like goofy icebreakers is the term I heard, like goofy icebreaker kind of things. We use music. People there, music is of course a very important part of life there in these two countries. So there's a lot of music. We often start with singing. It kind of like breaks the ice, just the singing. And also we do a lot of physical movement, because the talking about trauma is so heavy, and because you do feel it in your bodies, many times. If you're talking about something very heavy, the loss of a loved one, your body is tensing up and all that kind of stuff. So we do a lot of physical movement too. And the games and the movement encourage people to mix, so that we've got, the Dinka people and the Nuer people kind of mixing in these different activities. So it's relatively low cost. Our biggest costs are to pay facilitators, which we feel like is a good thing, because many of the facilitators need to earn money and aren't employed. And the other big expense is food, and that's because we have breakfast in the morning and like tea and some kind of bready thing, and then a pretty big lunch too. And that always feels good, because there is serious food insecurity in both locations. I'll just mention, yeah, the UN, the World Food Program, after COVID and after the war in Ukraine, they've had to, even starting before, they've had to steadily reduced food rations. And so they know that they're not providing enough food even to meet the basic caloric intake needs. So food rations have gone down in Uganda this past year. We were there. I was there in April, I think, and they said they were all worried. A lot of people were worried because they heard that the UN was going to cut food rations even more, and they did. And so for a significant number, they cut food rations altogether. So they're not providing any food there. But in Uganda, it is more fertile, so they're just expecting that people will grow their own food. But it's complicated, because many of the poorer people, which is many, but the very poorest people don't have money to even grow the food. And sometimes you need to like rent land from one of the host community people. Oops. Okay. Can go back or to the next slide. A little large. Okay. Oh, wow. That could, um, let's see. Yes. Sure. It's a variety of sources, So for me, I mean, typically I'll try to raise money before I go. So the money I've raised has been like from churches, from family, from friends. I mean, it's pretty small potatoes. My trips have been pretty small until this year, when we got a significant grant from the Wall Award. There are the bigger programs, like they did, like Central African Republic. It was the Catholic Church, Catholic Relief Services, and they did. I think they did like a $2 million program where they were doing hundreds. They were training hundreds of people, and then in Nigeria, it was the Church of the Brethren, and the Church of the Brethren did a lot of funding because they had members there, and also Mennonite church too. So I have a Mennonite background. And so one of my goals in this project was to try to document, to show that, okay, we have facilitators, we have a little infrastructure, not a little big, we have like 80 facilitators, and then to kind of go out and like market the program to some of the bigger donors, like an organization. So that's actually kind of my next step. One of my next steps. We're not finished yet, but after finishing, then I'd like to write up like a good report and try to go to Mennonite Central Committee, is one of the big actors in the Catholic Church, and some of these other folks to try to get what we'd hope is like a 3-year program at least. I thought, okay, well, I have enough for like a 1-year program because often it's hit or miss. The Friends Peace Teams gives like $5,000 a year to each of its countries. So they'll do activities with that, but it goes pretty fast, I would say. The workshop and prices have gone up. Food prices have gone up significantly around the world. And people attribute that to Ukraine, to the war in Ukraine. That including the World Food Program is saying that because of the war, they're having to pay higher food prices and higher fuel prices. So people don't really realize the impacts of some of these things, but that their food prices have gone up a lot. But our workshops used to be like, I don't know, I used to think in my head like $300 to $500. But now it's pretty much doubled, I would say. This is how I feel like HERAC can help prevent conflict. Is one, kind of dealing with their own trauma, and then two, so that's a big help. What we say is like it's kind of like looking at the wound, or taking the Band-Aid off the wound and just checking the wound, it's like, have I healed? How am I doing in my healing journey? So one is like looking at themselves and seeing where they are. And then the next, kind of with that knowledge, then you're a little bit better able to assess the people around you, and maybe not take things so personally. If you see that somebody is really upset, then you can recognize that person has gone through this terrible stuff. They're not just mad at me, or it's not all about me. It's about, things that they're trying to deal with. So better understand the people around them. We have a section on like constructive and destructive ways to deal with anger. Because what I'll hear sometimes from people is that they felt like they needed to kill the person who killed their loved one. Somebody killed their father. They had this view, or brother. They had this view that they had to get revenge, and that they weren't going to feel better, that their symptoms weren't going to resolve until they got this taken care of. So we discussed that kind of thing a little bit. And some of the older people in the workshops are able to tell the younger people that no, that doesn't really work. That the revenge just kind of makes a bigger mess and escalates. So I feel like that's constructive. And then one woman, an older woman from Congo, said something at the end of our workshop. She's a facilitator, but she said, I know I'm going to have more trauma, but at least I'll know what's going on. So at a minimum, it makes them a little bit more capable of dealing with the traumas that they're going to have to still keep dealing with. That was kind of a shock to me in working in Congo. I think I thought, oh, once people are, we've done these workshops in the village, we brought a lot of, some people are feeling better and feeling stronger, but then there will be a new attack or something, so some of these things have been going on for decades. So they're not going to be resolved immediately is what I've realized, but it's a start. I mean, you have to start somewhere is what I feel like. Okay, next. This was a quote from a young man. And I had met him like I think on my very first trip to Congo in 2014. And I'd met him. He was a nice young man. He and a friend came. They were asking for money. They were doing a project for orphans. And I wasn't able to help him, but I was just impressed by how conscientious they were and diligent. And then I saw him like a few years later when I went. And he was able to come to a workshop. And he said this was his comment at the end. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this nice young man, who's doing all this good work. He was carrying this around with him, feeling like he had to go kill these other people. And so anyway, that was very rewarding, I guess, to hear him say something like this. And we've had others too. He's not the only one. One woman in Congo said something like, well, now I don't feel like I have to go kill them. I might just beat them. So, so, well, that's progress. So, all right, next. So a big focus of this project has been training facilitators who are in the camp. And this young man is Zozo. His name is Zozo. And it's kind of sad. His name means like big problem. I think big problem is the name. So I think something was going on at the time of his birth, but he's such a gift. And he's also a minister, Presbyterian, a young Presbyterian pastor. And he's only like 25, but he works in the camp. We met at his church. And so he's one of the people selected to be a facilitator. And one of the things that they get is like we do like 8 days of training for the facilitators, not a huge amount, but it's what we can afford. So they get time to kind of work on their own traumatic experiences, because almost all of our facilitators have experienced trauma somewhere along the line, either in their home country or in the journey to a resettlement country or in the refugee camps themselves, because they're not totally secure. And there's things like scorpions and disease, that people are dealing with, malaria, typhoid, and various illnesses and very little medical care. Anyway, so the facilitators get to work on their own traumas, and then just the basic things that any facilitator needs to know, like how to present the material, how to kind of manage their time, how to deal with people in the group that might be, not cooperating, and then so they facilitate under supervision. So the supervisors the more experienced people will tell the less experienced people, well, you could have done blah, blah, blah. So there's debriefings after every workshop day. So the facilitators under this, they each get to facilitate 1 3-day workshop at least. Some were able to do 2. Next slide. They also get stipends, which I think I mentioned later. So this is the model. I know it looks a little bit complicated, but on the top left box, that's where we start kind of we have 4 workshops. So in a community, we'll go into a community like we did. And we did this scenario kind of in each country, in Kenya and in Uganda. So we had 4 workshops to start with, and each workshop has about 25 people, typically, plus like 3, it is a large group, 20 to 25. Each training or workshop also has facilitators, plus with our groups, we needed interpreters. We were doing 3 languages in Kenya, English and Dinka and Nuer. And then in Uganda, one of the pastors who was mobilizing, he wanted people with all kinds of languages. So he invited lots of people. So it got more complicated with language wise, because people don't really speak each other's languages, even though they're in pretty close geographic proximity. So they really could not communicate with each other, which was a surprise to me. Anyway, we'd have 4 workshops, and then out of those 4 workshops, we would pick 25 people who would go on to do training. And many people were eager to do training, to be trained as facilitators. So then we take the apprentices, and then they'll be the ones facilitating the next 4 workshops, and under supervision. And then this is what the proposal I wrote for Grinnell. Then out of that next group of 4 workshops, we would pick an additional 20 to 25 people to be trained as facilitators. And then they would get a chance to also facilitate under supervision. So that's the model. Where we are right now is that we're just like at the top of number 2. there where we've done the first 4 workshops. We've picked out people for the second group of facilitators. We lose people, unfortunately, not to death, but we picked out 25 in each country. And but and that was in April. Then when I was back in December, it turns out by that time the group we'd lost like 6 or 7 sometimes. And it's some people will end up going back to South Sudan. Some, and it is unfortunately it's like mostly women will get caught up in other activities. One woman was sick herself. One had a child in the hospital and couldn't attend. So we're trying so hard to have like half female, half male, just because women have very limited opportunities in the camp, and even for their whole lives. Mostly they haven't had an opportunity to go to school. So, and in my experience, they make very good trauma facilitators because often they are kind of caregivers and they are in caregiver roles. So they're very effective, I think, in working with traumatized people. So we're hoping to have the facilitator training of the second group next month. We're hoping we are still a little bit short of funds. We have used the wall funds because the workshops turned out to be more expensive than we anticipated by a lot. So I'm working to raise funds for the next facilitator training and the next workshops. So that's kind of where we are schematically, but I haven't quite put out a huge call yet for funds, but that's what I'm working for. And people have suggested a few smaller grants that we can apply for too. So that's kind of where we are in the program. So people are waiting for their next training. And I get a lot of communications actually, because now we can communicate on WhatsApp, so people can call people for free, so we have like work groups, that are there in Kakuma. And so, um, it's very fun. It's very fun, but I had to turn off my phone at night because nobody ever gets the time difference. So we're getting these calls at like 1 a.m, 4 a.m. Okay, next. So there's some of our groups. In the top right, that's Kenya. So it was the 4 of us doing training the facilitators, and we really had a nice time there. So we stayed together. We stayed in a compound by a NGO or philanthropic group that does all the education in the camps, Wendell Trust. So there we are working. On the lower right, those are our two they did more. They are interpreters. They're the 2 guys who are interpreting the manual. Really, it's more of a team. So the one on the left is Emmanuel, and he's from the Dinka ethnic group, and then Dual is on the right from the Nuer. And we were fortunate. It's that everybody's been able to work really well together. And there has not been a lot of mixing in the camps. Often they keep people in one side of the camps are huge, like a couple 100,000 people. So they have, so we found that some of the Dinka people had never, or the Nuer people had never been to the Dinka section, even though they've lived there 10 years, and it's just a few kilometers away. It's not that far. So they were kind of excited to go to the other sections because we all moved around. We had teams of both Dinka and Nuer who were working together. And so they became like teams, which I think was one of our accomplishments, that people were able to learn how to work well together and be in each other's churches. That was a comment from them, that they never dreamed they would be in a Dinka church or a Nuer church with people from these other tribes and stuff. So anyway, on the lower left group is those women were cooks for one of our workshops, and then up at the right is again some people from Kenya. The woman to the far left, I kind of lost track of her, but she went back to Sudan, but she was one of the rare women that I've met who was well educated, and by well educated I mean finished secondary school. That's a big accomplishment in the campus. If somebody has finished high school, they're kind of like one of the educational elites, I guess I would say. It's not easy to get all the way through secondary because you'll find people in primary who are, like 18, graduating from primary school, who are 18, 19, older. So it's just a longer journey to get through school. Next. That's what Kakuma looks like. That's me taking a picture. It's very dry. The two terrains are very different. So that's Kenya and it's very hot and dry. And it's in this area that's taken from the host community. And the host community are the Turkana people. And they're herders, so they live very like subsistence living. They have camels. And so I asked one person like what they eat once, and it's like blood, milk, and meat. So I've learned so much during this project. So anyway, so it can be very tough. What I would like to do, if I had another grant right this moment, what I would do is also do workshops with the host communities, because there's tension, there's friction between the host community and the camps, because here comes, you're living your herder life, and then here come 200,000 people from in Kenya. It's like 19 different countries, and all of a sudden, and they're getting food, they're getting food and water. And whereas the people in the host community often have less than that. So there are tensions naturally. Next. Oh, and that's how we get around on those little motorcycles. That's the water. People go and get water from like a tap. Next, and nobody wears helmets hardly. So it's a little nerve-wracking. And they make fences out of like tree branches there. You can see you'll see these fences all around. Kind of that's how people surround their property. Next. That's another shot of Kakuma. That's a water tower in the background. Next. So these two guys, these are two of our interpreters. They were terrific. And one is Dinka, the second one's Nuer. And it was, I don't know, it was very moving to me to see these two guys working. The interpreters have to work really close together because we're trying to keep it moving. And so we're going like Dinka, Nuer, English, Dinka, Nuer, English. And they're like looking at each other. And then sometimes one has to leave, to go to the bathroom. And so we had backup interpreters. So it was really remarkable. I thought how well they worked together. The guy farther to the left he was just a participant. Sometimes the participants would also help us with the interpretation. The person on to the left had lost his arm, and you'll see, unfortunately, they see few people with prosthesis. So we had several participants who did not have who were missing an arm or a leg. Next. This is just a slide from one of our sessions. Everybody's tall, if you haven't noticed. They're so tall. They told me that they're the tallest and the blackest people in the world from South Sudan. So I feel like really like a midget. Next. So this was Dual, our interpreter. So one group I worked pretty intensively with was this group of women in Kakuma, and none of them could read or speak English. And so far, our manual is still in English. So some of them would try, and everybody gets an English manual, but it's not much good, So some of them, their kids can read or they have friends, so they'll try to make it out. But what we did for the training, it really affected our training kind of pedagogy, so we had to modify our training, to simplify it first. And most of the concepts are pretty simple, like how to deal with anger. So we had to simplify our content somewhat. But in this case, so Dual was a great help to me. And I just worked with these women for like a few days. We were doing a refresher to help them get ready to present, and it's, if you can imagine, you're kind of retaining everything in your mind, if you can't write. So it will be a gift, I think, when we finish our manual in Dinka and Nuer. So it's about the manual. I mentioned it's 46 pages, and so far, I think maybe 25 have been translated. And this is terrible, but I think I'm waiting till once it's done. I think we're going to simplify it. So to kind of scale up this model, so we don't have a 46-page manual, and we can maybe make it a 20-page manual so we can introduce it to other populations. Okay, next. That's one of our graduating classes that was back from April, the first group of facilitator trainees. Next. There I am, one of our interpreters. It's just that's how I feel all the time. Okay, next. So this is some of the food that was that we had. That this was the popular food one, and it's like a Ethiopian pancake kind of. It's an injera kind of pancake if you've had Ethiopian food. And then the greens are great. I think I feel pretty good usually when I'm there in terms of diet wise because I think because I'm eating so much of these greens, it's which I need. So, and the pancake thing is pretty good. The red meat is goat, I believe. Okay, next. Okay, so on the right, that's one of our pastors, Reverend Cato, who's been like a real Energizer Bunny kind of. He's mobilized. He's the one who decided, no, we're not limiting this just to Dinka and we're going to have all kinds of ethnic groups. So he was like a rogue mobilizer. So he invited all these people from who speak different languages. So at first I was a little bit not upset, but concerned, but now I'm grateful. I think he knew better than I did. But it is a lot more work, But now we have people, facilitators who can speak like 8 different languages of South Sudan. So thanks to Reverend Kato. These are 2 of the trainers in the bottom left, Grace and Kathy 1. That's Kathy 1. I'm Kathy 2. And they're both well educated from Uganda. So they're the Ugandan trainers. Grace has like a PhD and she does a lot of work in prisons in Uganda. And then Kathy has like a master's in peace studies, peace and reconciliation. So it's just been a gift really to work with these teams. So Camise, so where we stayed in Uganda, it was very far, like 20 kilometers from the camp. So Camise, we had a driver, so Camise came and got us every day, which was kind of the only way we could do it. What he's holding in his hand is like the gasoline I think that he was using for that day. So that's how they sell the gas, So he would stop and like get gas in those bottles. Everybody's using leftover soda bottles or water bottles. Anyway, he was kind of a jack of all trades. He also has like a small pharmacy. And so if anybody's sick, they go to him too. So he's like the doctor and the driver. And I think he has a small school too. So he's very industrious. So, okay, next. That's Reverend Kato's house there. And you can see they'll have like a little compound. And as I understand it, like and that's mud, made of mud. And then once young people become older, sometimes they move into their own like next, please. These are his daughters next. And they're pulling out like kind of the bad maize or corn. Next. So, and that was from April when we were there before. That's Uganda. So you can see that the land is pretty good there. As long as there's water. Next. And there was water. And then sometimes in these places, like in Kakuma, it gets so dry that when they do get rain, then it floods. So that could be, yeah, you kind of have to get the right mix. Next. These are people carrying the plastic chairs that we use all the time. He kind of did double duty. Next. That's one of our apprentices presenting for the first time. I can't tell you how exciting it is when you have like somebody that you've been working with for like 8 or 9 days, and then they're finally presenting in front of a group, and everybody's nervous, and it was just really a gift to see it, and everybody did well. I mean, well, I can't say everybody. Some people are more cut out for it than others, So we tried to adapt, where some people who didn't feel comfortable presenting, it turns out, would be like a song leader or they do a prayer or something. The next, this was one of our young volunteer interpreters with the hat on, and it was like, it must have been 90 degrees. So next, that's just kind of more of the same. Next. This was during the facilitator training, and people were doing an exercise there, which was like kind of doing their life journey. So this was along the lines of helping the facilitators to deal with their own traumatic experiences. And you do kind of like a river of life, like charting out or drawing the path of your life. And you kind of see the ups and the downs, And one of the messages is kind of for me anyway, is like kind of, well, life goes on. You might have these terrible things happen. So I don't know if you'd know, but so I started this program in 2013. And then in 2015, my husband and I lost our son who was 25 to a drug related uh, incident. And so I'd been doing this drama work for like 1.5 or 2 years. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm having a trauma, and so I can't, it's helped me greatly. This has really helped me greatly, this program, um, to deal with our own family's trauma. And I could like recognize the symptoms. I've been talking for 2 years already about all the symptoms and the consequences. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's that symptom. And there's in both in me and my family. I saw how each of us, process this in a different way. And so this training was really invaluable for me. Okay, next. That's eating one of the days. Next. That's a class of that facilitators do in Uganda. Next. So these are kind of our accomplishments. So all together between our workshops so far, we actually had, we actually had 16. We had 8 in each country of these workshops. And so our apprentice team is about 36 because we had some that like might missed a few days, or their lives are just so I'll talk about it in a minute, so chaotic sometimes. Anyway, so we feel pretty good that we did train this number of apprentices, and we use these languages for the first time. So what happens sometimes in camps is that presentations, workshops are done in English, and so that limits the people who can attend. It's often younger and it's often male, and that's fine. They also need training, but I was really wanting to get older people in general, and who might not have had education, and also women who have lacked. Um, so we felt like that was an accomplishment. And then we are able to pay people. So when there's such a huge shortage of funds, and we don't pay a lot, it was like $10 a day for the apprentices. But I think the amount of money, if they receive any funds, in the camp, it's something like $5 a month. So it's like a tiny amount of money. So this was a pretty big deal, and people were excited to be able to earn something. And it wasn't just, so it was a lot of people that we paid. I haven't totaled it, but it was, the administrators, the pastor mobilizers, and then interpreters, and then the cooks. So it felt good to be able to just like be channeling this money like into each of these communities. Next. Challenges. Money is always a challenge, or it has been the whole time since I've been doing this in 10 years. Um, it was a complicated project structure and communication. It's hard because of the time difference. The best time is kind of like really early morning our time, like 7 or something, and 5 p.m., 5 or 6 p.m. their time. So it's just a little bit hard to coordinate. Plus, we'll have a conversation and they'll cut out, their internet will cut out like 5 times during a 10-minute conversation. So it's hard. It was so nice to be there, actually, to be working there in person after trying to communicate for months, at long distance. Different languages was a challenge. Gender equity, I mentioned, and then just the realities of refugee life, I mentioned, that people are just having to deal with really hard things there. And even in the camps, even if it's not their own family, or if their own family is okay, they still have loved ones back in South Sudan who are going through challenging times, or even or dying, and they don't have money to get back to bury their loved one. So it's just there are just a lot of challenges that they're dealing with. The next. How you can help, pray for us. I would appreciate that. We have a little small team with Jane and Dave and a few others. I I really value that because it helps me. Sometimes what happens to me when I come home is I get pulled into all these other activities, and it's hard to stay focused because it is far away and the time difference and all that. And it's hard. I mean, it is hard to make progress there. Uh, so funds we can use. Um, the The next time, this I usually do when I'm traveling sometimes is try to collect the solar lamps, which are very helpful for people. So people can do homework, even our interpreters can use it to look at the manual. They just, it adds to security to have a light there. So there is increasing amount of solar, I feel like, in the camps, but most families don't have these lamps, I don't believe. Books, I'm partial to books, so I usually try to bring books over for like, they have like small libraries. Um, Sanitary pad materials, there are groups there that do make sanitary pads. Some that they have like a template and everything, or there are groups here in the US that make sanitary pads that we could bring. Airline miles, but I would really like either for me to use to go there or to bring our trainers here. I'd love to have them come here. I mean, this again, if I had a whole nother project, I could do about 5 projects, right? If I had a whole nother project, one thing I would do would be to work with veterans here. I feel like I know there's a high suicide rate among veterans, US veterans, and I feel like this program would really help them because they're dealing with some of the same kinds of issues, I believe. So a program with veterans. We have done this program in the US with refugees. But it's really, there are plenty of Americans who've experienced trauma. Well, another one would be with parents or with family members of people who've been lost during COVID or during the opioid epidemic. Yeah, so there are plenty of people in the world that need trauma education and healing. So airline miles would be to bring some of them here, to both to let them see the country and also to help do trainings. You can volunteer. Friends Peace Teams uh, also there's like a board and um, there are some opportunities abroad also. And then even just general advocacy on global hunger issues are working like their UN support organizations. And then the Alternatives to Violence Project I mentioned, they've been doing a lot in Washington lately in prisons and now, as of last year, in schools. So they've been doing some of this with students. I went over several months ago to South Seattle where they were doing it in schools with the whole student body, like alternative high schools, to do all the students and then also with the staff. So next slide. Yeah, I think that's just about the financial. Next slide. Oh, that's just a picture. Well, you always have these little faces looking in at you, little and big faces, but there are always every once in a while I'll step out of the workshop, and I'll see like all these people like looking in the windows and everything. So the next, that's just some mushrooms. Since I moved to this area, I'm noticing all these mushrooms. So that was a Ugandan mushroom. So anyway, thank you. That's what I have.